On the 27th of April 2008, the horrific case of Josef Fritzl sent shockwaves around the world.
Josef Fritzl, a monstrous father who imprisoned his daughter, Elisabeth, for 24 years, used her as a sex slave and fathered 7 children with her.
Josef Fritzl was the most horrific story I've ever reported in 30 years of journalism.
Josef carried out all these deeds in a secret basement that existed beneath his very own house, which he had been building for over 15 years. This basement was so secure and secret that even Elisabeth's own mother could not find out that her daughter was imprisoned in the basement. And not once did anyone have the slightest suspicion.
Surely the most extraordinary and the most tragic thing about Josef Fritzl is that he managed to camouflage himself as a respectable member of society, as a pillar of community, while at the same time he was just leading this double life of monstrosity.
When Josef imprisoned Elisabeth, she was only 18 years old.
The Austrian father, accused of holding his daughter captive thousands of times over 2 decades, has been sentenced to life in prison.
And for the 24 years following her imprisonment, Elisabeth endured a trauma of physical abuse, harassment, and violence that is beyond imagination.
This is one of the horrific cases ever recorded in human history.
Elisabeth was born on April 6, 1966, in Amstetten, Austria, one of the 7 children of Josef Fritzl and Rosemarie. But according to a news report, when Elisabeth was just 11 years old, Josef first molested her. And as Elisabeth grew older, Josef's madness also grew. However, these were not sudden incidents, because Josef's criminal record clearly shows that he was not a normal man, but rather a sex addict with a criminal mindset. In 1967, Josef had raped a 24-year-old nurse by holding a knife to her throat. That same year, Josef was also considered a suspect in the molestation and assault of a 21-year-old woman. Apart from rape, Josef was also accused of suspected murders, but due to a lack of evidence, no action was taken against him. Josef even spent 1 year in jail as a punishment for rape. But 15 years after this incident, around 1982, his name was removed from the criminal record. And in this very year, Josef began planning to imprison Elisabeth, a plan which began with building a small room in the basement. Josef Fritzl had already thought about building an underground cellar to keep a prisoner in 1970. In the 1970s, when the Cold War was ongoing, Austria was not only a part of the Soviet Union's sphere, but also a border state. In such a situation, due to war tensions, having underground nuclear bunkers in homes was considered essential. Josef, taking advantage of this, even obtained official permission for the underground construction, and the local council even gave him some money to build a nuclear bunker. Josef had done excellent planning to build this cell. He paid attention to every detail. The concrete and steel material used to build the cell was arranged from those construction companies where he himself had previously worked. Josef had made the entire cell soundproof. No matter how much someone makes noise, screams and shouts or even cries, the people living upstairs would not hear anything. This was the reason why Elisabeth's mother could not find out for 24 years that her daughter was imprisoned in their own home's basement. To reach the cell where Elisabeth was kept, one had to open a total of 8 doors. At the beginning of the basement, there were 2 doors. One was a hinged style door, while the other was a metal door reinforced with concrete, which operated only by a remote control device. The weight of these doors was between 300 to 500 kilograms. In the final 2 cells of the basement, Josef had also installed a toilet, a sink, a stove, a refrigerator, and a bed. But all these things did not mean that life inside the cell was good. Elisabeth herself wrote about life in that cell, that the fear of living in the cell always remained with her. There were so many mice in the cell that Elisabeth sometimes had to catch them with her own hands. And in the summer days, the situation would become unbearable due to sweat. Forget seeing the open air and sunlight. There wasn't even a window in that cell, nor was there enough space for Elisabeth to walk around a little. There is still much more to come in the story of the atrocities committed against Elisabeth inside the cell. But before that, let's find out how exactly Josef imprisoned Elisabeth and why her mother didn't know about it. How was she imprisoned? The year was 1984. Elisabeth had turned 18 years old. The work going on in Josef's basement was now complete, and it was time to accomplish the task for which the basement had been prepared. Josef told Elisabeth that he needed her help to install the final door of the cell in the basement, after which Elisabeth began to go down the stairs towards the basement. But she had no idea that she would be imprisoned in this basement for the next 24 years. During the process of installing the door, seeing the right opportunity, Josef pressed a cloth soaked in ether chemical onto Elisabeth's mouth and nose. Josef did not remove the cloth until Elisabeth became unconscious. A little while later, when Elisabeth opened her eyes, she was lying on the bed inside that very cell for whose door she had come to help install. Both her hands were tied behind her back with an iron chain, and the chain was so short that Elisabeth couldn't even get down from that bed. All this had happened to Elisabeth in the dark cell of the basement, while Josef had already prepared the story behind Elisabeth's disappearance. Josef forced Elisabeth to write a letter, in which she wrote that she was running away from home to join a religious cult. But just one letter was not enough to convince Elisabeth's mother and her friends. So Josef also used Elisabeth's past as a form of proof, which made people believe the letter. In fact, Elisabeth had previously threatened to run away from home many times. Even once or twice when she had tried to run away, Josef himself and the local police had brought her back home. And once, Elisabeth had even reached Vienna City with a friend. And all these incidents turned the letter, forcefully written by Elisabeth from the basement cell, into such a proof that no one doubted it, not even Elisabeth's mother, Rosemarie. The result was that Josef was successful in his planning, and this planning continued as it was for the next 24 years. While the 18-year-old Elisabeth, locked in the basement cell, had no idea that the letter written under Josef's fear would make her life worse than hell for the next 24 years. After keeping her chained for the first few days, Josef stopped using the chain. But behind this, it wasn't compassion. Rather, Josef found it troublesome to be physically involved with Elisabeth with the chain on. Josef would come many times a day, fulfill his need, and then leave. He even forced Elisabeth to follow scenes shown in porn movies. For the next 5 years, Elisabeth remained completely alone in that cell. Then, in 1989, Elisabeth gave birth to her first child, Kirsten. But this was not a moment of joy for her. Instead, it was a trauma that one cannot even imagine. On the other hand, even after fathering a child with his own daughter, Josef's madness did not stop, and he continued to use Elisabeth as a sex slave. From 1989 to the next 12 years, Elisabeth gave birth to a total of 7 children inside that cell, and that too without any medical help. For the safe birth of the children, Josef had given Elisabeth a disinfectant, a pair of scissors, and a book published in the 1960s which had information about childbirth. Out of Elisabeth's 7 children, one, Michael, had trouble breathing a few hours after birth and died. Josef knew the child's condition was not well, but he did not get any help. Later, when Josef was interrogated, he revealed that he had burned the baby's body in the furnace. Of the remaining 6 children, 3, Kirsten, Stefan and Felix, stayed in the cell with Elisabeth until 2008. But despite being imprisoned in the cell and having no facilities, Elisabeth taught her children and cared for them as much as possible. While the other 3 children, Lisa, Monica and Alexander, were living in the same house with Josef and Elisabeth's mother, Rosemarie, in whose basement Elisabeth was imprisoned with her other 3 children. Even Rosemarie knew that these children were Elisabeth's. But how was this possible? Well, here too, Josef had planned things very cunningly. The 3 children living with Rosemarie were left by Josef himself at the gate of his own house. Along with them were letters, forcefully written by Elisabeth, which stated that this is my child and you, meaning Rose and Josef, must care for it. With this tactic, Josef kept all 3 children with him, and Rosemarie had no reason to suspect anything. To cover up any shortcomings, Josef would force Elisabeth to write a letter every month. Then he would drive many kilometers away and post that letter to his own home address. And when these letters kept reaching Elisabeth's mother, Rosemarie, she saw no reason to suspect Josef. Even in his society, Josef was a respected man who interacted with everyone very nicely. But Josef's real face was only visible to Elisabeth. Amidst this cruelty from her father, even if Elisabeth tried to escape from the cell, she could not have succeeded. Apart from the cell's strong security system, Josef had terrorized her to such an extent that she couldn't even think about it: the escape. Although Josef, with his cunning, did all this to Elisabeth for 24 years, when he used that same cunning to completely erase Elisabeth's story, he was unsuccessful, and his brutality was revealed to the whole world. And all this was made possible because of Elisabeth's first child, Kerstin. In April 2008, Kerstin, imprisoned in the cell, became critically ill, after which she was admitted to the local hospital in Amstetten, Lower Austria, on April 19, 2008. And the man who took Kerstin to the hospital was none other than Josef himself. When it was time for Kerstin's treatment, the doctors were stunned to see her condition. Kerstin was severely malnourished. Her skin was completely pale. Seeing Kerstin in this state, the doctors suspected child abuse and parental negligence in her care. Due to their suspicion, the doctors tried to speak to the parents to learn about Kerstin's medical history, but during this, it was discovered that Kerstin's mother had been away from home for years and no one knew where she lived. After getting this information about Kerstin's mother, the doctors' suspicion grew even more, after which they issued one appeal after another on TV, stating that if Kerstin was to be treated in time, her mother must come to the hospital as soon as possible. This appeal was also seen on the TV in the cell by Elisabeth and her two children, Stefan and Felix. After which, Elisabeth repeatedly requested Josef to take her to the hospital, and Josef agreed. But this was not his compassion, but another ploy. In fact, with his increasing age, it was becoming difficult for the 73-year-old Josef to look after both families, and he had been thinking for a long time about how to free Elisabeth without anyone finding out. In this situation, the hospital's appeal seemed like an opportunity to him, and he took Elisabeth and her two children out of the cell to the hospital and told people that after seeing the appeal, Elisabeth had returned home on her own. On April 26, 2008, when Elisabeth reached the hospital, the doctors, seeing her condition, became suspicious of Josef's story, and Elisabeth was taken to a separate room for interrogation, after which the story of Josef's brutality was revealed to the entire world. After a detailed inquiry, Josef was kept in a psychiatric prison for 15 years, and last year, in 2024, he was shifted to a normal prison. While the identity of Elisabeth and her 6 children has been kept very secret, and they have been provided with complete help and care to start a new life.